Okay, picture this. Rumors are just flying through the streets. The king, they're saying, is about to order his army to open fire on his own people. So 7,000 men and women, totally desperate and, really determined, they gather together. They're looking for weapons, and that search is going to lead them to a fortress, a place that symbolized everything they absolutely hated. And that, right there, was the day the French Revolution kicked off. So, in this explainer, we are diving deep into one of the most game-changing events in all of modern history, the French Revolution. It's this incredible story about the birth of huge ideas, things like freedom and individual rights. But, and this is a big but, it's also a story of shocking violence, tyranny, and just sheer terror. All right, we've broken this whole thing down into 4 parts. First, we're going to look at the conditions that turned France into a powder keg just waiting for a spark. Then we'll get right into the action the moment the people finally had enough and rose up. After that, things get dark. We'll dive into the revolution's radical turn and the infamous Reign of Terror. And finally, we'll unpack its incredible and seriously long-lasting legacy. So what exactly was this powder keg? Well, it was something called the Old Regime. That was basically the society and all the institutions of France before 1789. And let me tell you, it was fundamentally, deeply broken. Yeah, that number right there, that shows you just how big the problem was. When King Louis XVI came to power back in 1774, he basically inherited an empty bank account. I mean, years of war, all the crazy, extravagant spending at Versailles, and even helping out with the American Revolution, it all added up to a staggering debt of over 3 billion livres. The government was spending a huge chunk of its money just paying off the interest on its loans. It was a total mess. And this whole financial crisis was happening inside a society that was just unbelievably divided. Get this, the vast majority of people, we're talking like 98%, they were all lumped into what was called the Third Estate. And that was everybody, from the poorest peasants to well-off merchants. The other tiny 2%, that was the clergy and the nobility. Okay, and this is where the injustice just becomes crystal clear. You had the First and Second Estates, that's the clergy and the nobility. They owned a whopping 30% of all the land and had all these incredible privileges. And the biggest one, the most important one, they paid basically 0 taxes. Nothing. So the entire weight of paying for the whole country fell on the Third Estate, the people with the fewest rights and pretty much no power. This quote from an old etching, man, it just perfectly captures how people were feeling. They saw the whole relationship as predatory, completely inescapable. The nobleman is the spider and the peasant is the fly. Just trapped, with absolutely no way out. I mean, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And it wasn't just the French who felt it. Even outsiders could see what was coming. An English traveler, Arthur Young, wrote this really chilling observation just 2 years before everything exploded. He could just sense that the crazy inequality and the way common people were treated was putting the rich, the aristocracy, in serious danger. Not just their property, but their actual lives. So with all this pressure just building and building, the question really wasn't if France was going to explode, but when. All of that anger that had been simmering just below the surface was about to boil over and turn all this discontent into a revolution that nobody could stop. And wow, did things escalate fast in 1789. So the king calls a meeting, the Estates General, because he needs to raise taxes. But what does he do? He walks the Third Estate out. So what do? They just go to a nearby tennis court and declare themselves the National Assembly. Less than a month after that, the people stormed the Bastille. And by August, the assembly had gotten rid of the entire feudal system. I mean, the whole thing. It was just a stunningly fast transformation. So you might be asking, what exactly was this National Assembly? Well, it was basically the first revolutionary government. The representatives of the Third Estate just declared, hey, we are the true voice of the French nation. And they all took an oath, swearing they wouldn't stop until they had written a constitution that would finally limit the king's absolute power. At this point, the king was totally cornered. I mean, you've got Paris in a complete uproar, peasants are out in the countryside attacking noble estates. Louis XVI really had no choice. He was forced to officially recognize the National Assembly and accept that, yeah, his power wasn't going to be absolute anymore. But the story is far from over. The revolution was about to take a turn, a much more radical, much more violent turn. This is the part of the story where those early ideals of liberty get tested by war, by fear, and by that bloody machine, the guillotine. The shift from a constitutional monarchy to a full-on republic was swift, and it was brutal. France, fearing an invasion from other European kings, declared war. This group of radical revolutionaries, the Jacobins, they seize power, storm the king's palace, and throw the whole royal family in prison. Not long after that, the monarchy is officially abolished, and King Louis XVI, he's put on trial for treason and executed in public. And this event leads directly into one of the most infamous periods in all of history, the Reign of Terror. It was led by the Jacobin leader Maximilien Robespierre, and the government's policy was basically one of severe control and punishment. If you were even seen as an enemy of the Republic, you could be arrested, given a joke of a trial, and sent straight to the guillotine. And this really shows you the fierce debate that was happening inside the revolution itself. On one side, you have guys like Camille Desmoulins saying, "Whoa, hold on, liberty is about happiness, reason, and justice." But on the other side, you have Robespierre arguing that terror is justice, that it's swift, severe, and absolutely necessary to save the Republic. Well, in the end, Robespierre's campaign of terror just became too much, even for his own supporters. They turned on him. And in this really poetic but also brutal twist of fate, the guy who designed the terror was arrested, convicted, and sent to the guillotine himself. And that, finally, brought an end to the most radical phase of the revolution. So, after all of that chaos, all that bloodshed, what was actually left? Well, in our final section, we're going to look at the powerful ideas that came out of all that turmoil and how they completely reshaped not just France, but the whole world. Okay, this might be the single most important document to come out of the entire revolution, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, and its ideas were totally groundbreaking. It said that rights are natural, that power comes from the people, not some king, and that every single citizen is equal in the eyes of the law. This literally created a whole new language for politics. Now, you gotta remember, a lot of people back then couldn't read. So to get these big ideas across, the revolutionaries used these really powerful, simple symbols. A broken chain? That means you're free. A bundle of rods? That shows strength and unity. It was like a visual language of freedom that absolutely everyone could understand. But the revolution didn't just lead to a stable, happy democracy. The government that came after the terror, it was called the Directory, was pretty weak and just didn't get much done. And all that political instability created a power vacuum, which was filled by a very famous, very brilliant, and very ambitious general, Napoleon Bonaparte. And yeah, he would eventually go on to crown himself emperor. So in the end, right, despite the terror, despite Napoleon, what's the revolution's most important legacy? It's the ideas. Sure, it ended the monarchy in France, but way more importantly, it unleashed these concepts of liberty, equality, and democratic rights for the whole world to see. And those ideas would go on to inspire tons of movements for freedom and independence for the next 200 years. And that leaves us with a really complicated inheritance, doesn't it? The ideals from the revolution are the foundation for so many of our modern democracies, but they were born out of a time of extreme violence. So it forces us to ask a tough question. How should we remember a legacy that is, at the same time, so incredibly inspiring and so deeply terrifying?